I am Dom, and today I guess I'm, working around Botswana, the map in the back here. Uh, yeah, exactly. It's been a busy week this week, and it's going to be a busy week next week between Streaming Media West Connect, which I presented for on Monday, and then of course you and I are back full force this following Monday for an entire day of content delivery summit. Uh, Yeah, I have. Well, and as a matter of fact, for the last 2.5 weeks, I've been battling a really bad case of poison ivy. So I'm actually keeping long sleeves on today so that I don't gross anybody out. But no, I've been focused on some work. Yeah, Bruce Banner. Yeah, no, so yesterday involved buying 140 fence posts, and tomorrow I start putting them in over the weekend. So that's been interesting. And then Michelle and I actually officially today have launched Farm Technologies. Farm being Farming Algorithm Resource Marketplace. So we're actually doing a marketplace for algorithms that she and I will create, mostly she, because she's the math person, but then also third-party algorithms for farmers that would work with drones and other kind of electric vehicles on the farm. So that is one of those, it feels in some ways like a 90-degree angle from streaming, but in reality, because there's a whole lot of video and a whole lot of feedback and a whole lot of decisioning, it's going to fit fairly closely to what I've done for the last 25 years in streaming. So
Oh,
that's
there you
what I've been
go.
doing.
Apparently, all my audio was off, so the audience out front, you guys could hear me, but the audience out front didn't have my mic on. But thanks, Loki, for feeding that back on the chat room. Thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate the real-time feedback because we're streaming engineers the wrong side of the camera today, so all very difficult. I think we've got our one of our other three regular co-hosts. Is that right? I can't count this week anyway. With us, Mark, are you out there?
Hello, sir. How are you?
Not bad. How's the kids, most importantly?
Large and loud.
Good.
And
Treating you well.
You're not screaming like a baby at the moment, but I'm assuming you do run into that from time to time.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, they're teething now, so they're indescribably cranky. But things are good. Things are good. And it's been a busy couple of months for 090 Media. That we've grown by leaps and bounds. We've got a new facility up in the Bay Area. We've got a complement of 15 people now, which is unprecedented for us. And we're working on a bunch of really interesting projects that I can't talk about, and some that I can. But yeah, things are really cooking right now. I'm getting very little sleep.
Busy across the sector at the moment. I get that sense, at least. Everyone might be sitting still,
Yeah,
but
I don't.
is keeping themselves busy.
I'm not hearing a whole lot of boredom out there anymore.
No, that is definitely for true. Right, Tim, do you want to lead us into our guests? Let's find out who we've got with us this month.
Let me do that. So we'll actually start ladies first with Tanu. Tanu, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you've done in the industry in the past, and sort of where you sit at the moment.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Tanu Aggarwal, and right now I'm an engineering director at Twitch in their video team. I've been in the video and streaming industry, I'd say, for about a handful of years or less than that. Before that, really, I was in real-time communications for a very long time, from all the way from to video. In hindsight, I feel that it was delivering audio and video as opposed to the big wild west of the internet. And I think that is what fascinates me about streaming, video streaming specifically so much, is the fact that we've taken video and we started using this underlying tech of the internet, which wasn't really built to handle big pipes of video, massively scaled video across the world. So it's been a very interesting, fascinating ride in that sense. The last 2 years, I've been working at helping the team come out with a new product, which I'm very excited about, because I feel that it'll enable new experiences And that is the interactive video service that we launched around in July, which is primarily, taking Twitch, the video platform that powers Twitch, and packaging it and offering it to developers so they can come forward with their own experiences, perhaps build another Twitch in their own industry, different experiences, which I like to call, the more lean forward streaming experiences, as opposed to the lean back ones that we are so used to these days. So I'm excited about that. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Good. And I promise we won't talk about G.722 or G.711 as much as I would love to have that part of the conversation again. So
probably you and I would be the only ones who know what that was.
All right. And then Nick, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about, your background. I know you're relatively new to the industry, but tell us a bit about what you're doing.
Thank you. Well, pleasure to be here. So I'm Nick. I am a engineering lead at Fubo TV. I've been there for about 3.5 years now, give or take. I've done numerous roles there. I started on the player. I started in the iOS player world. Eventually then actually had the opportunity to start the repository for our Apple TV apps, and then also spent some time doing the Roku app. And then now, as of the last 2 years, give or take, I actually do our VOD encoding and packaging pipeline. And so I've been on both sides of the world of streaming, but as you know, I'm very new to the industry compared to, as you guys probably all of you in general.
Well, good. Thank you for being here, and we'll definitely enjoy the conversation. So Dom, I want to actually start off with a topic that you had mentioned. It was we sort of got into this before the call. Twitch actually has announced a music platform, if I understand, or music solution to go along with gaming, and that led us into the conversation about licensing rights. So let's kick off with that.
Yeah, so we touched on this last month a little bit. It's been certainly an interesting sort of period with regard to rights, because obviously lots and lots of musicians are fairly stuffed for work. So from my side, I've had a number of calls from people who know I work with streaming, who have over September basically decided to stop waiting for venues to sort out how they're going to continue the business model of creating an audience and engaging them with talent. And the talent has sort of been ringing me up saying, how do I go direct to market? What tools should I use? Zoom's terrible for jamming with my friends, or I'm finding it really difficult to workflow, promoting an audience and dealing with tickets and all of this sort of stuff. So clearly there's a new community coming to market. But one of the groups, actually based out near you, Mark, a jazz player who plays with a radio show, I know, wanted to start a platform that he described as being like YouTube Live, but for musicians to play jazz. And I said, yeah, technically that might seem daunting to you, but that's kind of quite straightforward. And I'm sure people on this call would share that. The challenge is going to be licensing. And it sent me off on a revision of where music licensing has got to, particularly with regard to jazz and jazz standards. And actually, jazz is kind of axiomatic with most of the IPR law that was formed certainly in 1909 and 1931, which is still a bit of a legacy on how music licensing works today. So I think it's a challenge for musicians to set up a platform, play to an audience with reasonable quality, but also to do it without infringing somebody's copyright. Even melodies within jazz standards, just leave. If you sit down and try to play jazz through YouTube, then you've got to pay, aside from the ASCAP licenses and so on that YouTube would have to pay, you're supposed to pay licenses directly to other rights bodies and so on. So it's a big disorganized mess that sort of seems to be designed to prevent artists from actually getting their music out to audiences, which, that's my viewpoint. I'm sure it's making someone some money somewhere, but I'm pretty sure it's not the artists, if I'm honest. So I think it's interesting that Twitch has obviously made an announcement. I think there might be people on the call who can get into the details more than I can, but they've made an announcement that they're bringing out a soundtrack feature, which basically allows them to play music while they're streaming live. So instead of playing their own selection of DJ mixes or whatever it is, I'm presuming Soundtrack is essentially working with the rights bodies to provide a library or a resource of copyright cleared or tagged or measured content, which is going to report properly, which means that videos of people gaming or whatever can be accompanied by tunes rather than having illegal pirate rebroadcasts of music going on. I think that could be quite a game changer. There's a big community, which I think, I'm thinking of Mixcloud in particular at the moment, who seem to have been really trying to get out into the market with the DJ mixing model. So I don't know what the economics of the Twitch model are. I haven't explored that yet, but the Mixcloud one I have explored quite a bit recently, and they're offering an RTMP mount point for £10, £10 over here, so it must probably $10, $12 your side of the water. For an RTMP endpoint, they've got an embedded player on their site which has got some banner ads around it. They play you a pre-roll sting and let you get on with streaming your mix through the RTMP into an HLS/dash distribution. You can't cross embed it, so you can't put it into your own site. And my experience on looking at most of the DJs is you've got people DJing, really quite good, straightforward DJing going on, but to fill the video space, they're rerunning some World Rally, or they're playing some old football games, or they're rebroadcasting all sorts of illegal content. So quite how Mixcloud is covering the licensing and the technology costs when, for example, an internet radio platform that I use is charging $79 a month for 1,500 listener hours, and that's including the content rights. So I'm not quite sure how the economics for Mixcloud does a much higher bandwidth proposition with the risk of copyright video getting rebroadcast or dealing with it. But what I do know is the unicorns as a group are definitely the hot target for the rights bodies at the moment. And the thing that frustrates me is the jazz musicians can't make a living at the moment. That's more important to me than a bunch of lawyers dealing with rights. I think there's a proper monopoly issue going on, which is something that as an industry, I think we should be able to do something about. Anyway, I've just monologued about music rights. You don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from the guests.
So can I comment on this? Actually?
Please,
so randomly, randomly, you mentioned Mixcloud, right? Randomly, maybe about 3 months ago, some guy shows up in one of the FFmpeg channels on Video Dev, right? And he's asking questions about NVIDIA, CUDA, encoding, right, et cetera, right? And of course, GPU encoding, for whatever reason, I just have to comment. I can't help myself. I have to send you the documentation because I've done a lot of research on it. I have a lot of fun with it. Turns out he's the founder of Mixcloud. Basically, they actually host their own hardware. They have their own hardware. They own their own data centers. They do all the different stuff, right? And so I will make the introduction. Maybe he'd be a good guest for you guys in the future.
Nice.
But it was just funny. I'm like, dude, I personally love electronic music. I've been in the scene. I actually worked in the ticketing side of it, right? As a consultant back in the day. And now I'll tell you what, live music, actually at least in the electronic music scene, the rise of the internet, in my personal opinion, the experience you get live is actually the reason you go there, right? And so the reality is, you wonder why the world of electronic music became a thing is because usually the DJs and the stuff like that, the more underground scenes, they're never going to play it. So they basically play music that they don't even release, right? And so that music is never going to be anywhere outside of that live experience. And so personally, it's really, really difficult to go ahead and replicate it. And I know a lot of artist friends that are DJs that are struggling still to this day, where they used to make a living touring around the world and playing in venues that they cannot do anymore, right? But platforms are trying to do it. I guess the world still hasn't, accepted what COVID actually is, or what the world is going to be moving forward. And so I feel for them. Let's put it that way. Yeah. And so, but yeah, it's funny. NVNC, CUDA, I don't know, randomly, I'm like, dude, it's like I'm talking to a hero here. You're the founder of the site that I was using, and we're chatting back and forth, and in the video dev world on Slack one day. And so it was a fun conversation.
So something that's interesting, Dom, here in the States, and I don't know if they're doing this over in Europe, but here old drive-in movie theaters are getting a second life, not just for showing movies, but also for concerts. And you're having some sort of mid-level artists who are going out and setting up concerts at drive-in movie theaters so that they can sell tickets like they normally do, and then you come and enjoy it in your car within the 6-foot bubble around it. So I think, as Nick's saying, we're sort of accepting COVID as being the standard way things are being operated at the moment, but also coming up with innovative ideas on how to do live events. I don't know if EDM would that way, but ultimately for sort of traditional pop, it seems to be a trend now.
So I've got, it's interesting in contrast, I've got a friend who's a professional comedian, and it was in the same week I think it was just the beginning of September, the artist just suddenly went, it's the autumn coming, I need to work out how to make a living this autumn. In contrast, I had a call with a comedian, and I made a completely different set of recommendations to him, because obviously licensing isn't a challenge for him generally. They don't, comedians don't get into plagiarism, they're more like sports and news. They actually value the immediacy of the performance, which I think musicians should get back to, but that's a different story. But the comedians have a different requirement. I actually suggested that he went and looked at using Zoom webinars for their events, but in part because on occasion he can actually go to his audience and spring someone into the conference call, have a bit of real-time banter with them and drop them back out. So, and actually if he was doing, a peak load of 1,000 people paying to come to a Zoom webinar, he would be doing really well as a comedian. So interesting how the technologies have different use cases.
I was going to say, much like him doing that in a bar and calling somebody up front to have a quick conversation with from the audience, who would love that. Yeah. So Mark, are you with the shift that you've had here in the last couple of months, and obviously you're growing, are you finding, first of all, if you're doing something with somebody from home, that they may run into these licensing issues with music playing in the background off the radio or something like that? And B, to Dom's point, when you start working with professionals who are trying to figure out how to make a living, how do you help them understand what tool sets they need, whether it's Zoom for a comedian or something else for a traditional musician?
So yeah, I mean the story with copyright strikes and that sort of thing on specifically YouTube has been the same for years and years and years, and I've been having the same conversation, just getting back to the whole Twitch soundtrack thing for a bit, for years now, about okay, what doesn't it make sense for them to own this? Doesn't it make sense for YouTube or Facebook or Twitch to own this process, to have artists and labels that they're curating these playlists and they're pushing them out for use live on live streams? And Twitch finally got it, and I think it's absolutely the next step. If I'm a streamer, if I'm a a esports caster or something like that, and I have a nightly show that I'm constantly struggling with copyrighted music, and do I play my friend's music, do I play something that's just not going to get hit? Luckily the algorithm on Twitch isn't all that sensitive compared to YouTube, I find. So you're less likely to get hit for your VOD content afterwards. I don't know what that says about about the technology behind the algorithm, but Twitch also doesn't. Tanu, maybe you can correct me here if I'm wrong. I don't believe Twitch penalizes streamers for live streams, right? It's really just only the on-demand content, which is not the case on YouTube. You could have your whole channel taken down on YouTube if you have copyrighted content on there. So, I think we're starting to see a shift with this. We're starting to see, I don't think we'll see the restrictions get relaxed anytime soon, but we're starting to see alternatives pop up, and I think this will be the first. I know Facebook also has a similar offering that isn't quite ready for prime time, I hear, but we're going to continue to see the leveraging of this situation to make it easier for streamers and casters to use music and use copyrighted content in their broadcasts.
Sorry, while you're talking, I'm just going to chip in. Sorry, Tanu, just 1 second. I'm just enjoying playing with the new chat integration we've got in the stream, and I thought it was worth. Somebody asked what fingerprinting technology it was, and Jim McNeil's just dropped in the chat room that it's Audible Magic is the tech behind the algorithm, apparently. So, Tanu, over to you.
No, it's open source. I think Audible Magic's actually open source, if I'm not mistaken. But just, right. I've looked this up, if I'm not mistaken.
And Tanu, before you answer, since everybody else has interrupted you, your opinions.
Ladies first, only unless she wants to talk, okay? Right? Obviously.
That's okay. That's okay.
Tanu's opinions are her own. They are not Twitch's or Amazon's.
At the same time, I'd like to say that, it was high time that someone came up on the side of the creator to give music that wasn't causing copyright notices to be given to the content creators. I find it very interesting, that music creators, the professional music creators, are actually doing quite well because of these social media platforms. Their music gets used. I mean, just the other day I was reading about a Fleetwood Mac song from 1977. It went viral, which is, because it came up on TikTok. So it's interesting how that play is coming around. But I really wanted to add one more thing to the soundtrack feature at Twitch. The nice thing is that today, if you're not using the feature, when you recorded the VODs, you would lose all the audio. The gaming streamer would lose the audio. But now that we made it multi-audio track, we're able to keep the gamer's audio in and delete the music from it.
Oh, very
Which,
clever.
and I actually had a question about that. In that it's abstracted, does Twitch have the ability to switch out the music on VOD content moving forward? In other words, if a license expires with a particular artist or a particular label, will that audio track get switched out on VOD content automatically, or is it baked in for eternity?
Honestly, I don't know, but that's a good thing for me to find out.
Do you know what?
Well,
actually,
yeah, it'd be interesting to know.
I might have a comment on that actually, Mark, because one of the things that the Verge article did highlight is that the audio stream is separated from the video stream. Now,
That's what I mean. So
Well,
theoretically, one would think they would have the ability to switch out that audio track on the VOD content moving forward.
Well, Tanu also seems to be indicating that not only is the audio and video separate, that the speaker audio for the gamer talking is separate from the audio of the music playing. And that's fascinating, because if suddenly you want to make your content relevant again 2 years down the line, and there's an old, retro song like Fleetwood Mac that comes out, potentially what I hear you asking, Mark, is could I go back and put new audio?
Well, I wasn't asking if the creator could do it. I was asking if Twitch could do it, just as a matter of copyright. If you have a ASCAP BMI thing that and some license expires, can Twitch just go back and across the board uniformly switch out audio across any content that uses that track or that label or that artist? That's more what I was getting at. But valid point. If I'm a creator and I've laid down my 2-track thing, can I go back and switch out the music track myself moving forward? I believe the answer is probably no at this point, but it'd be an interesting feature.
Yeah, because
for sure.
At some point we're going to be past COVID-19, and invariably there's going to be some popular song about COVID-19. 5 years down the line that somebody wants to come back and shove into their COVID-19 era streams. Mm-hmm. Speaking of COVID, I'm going to make a really bad segue here, but Nick, you are an engineering lead. How has COVID-19 impacted productivity from your side personally, and also say from a team management standpoint? And you're based in New York City, if I remember.
Yeah. So I will say this: I'm not a manager in the sense that I have no direct reports. I'm kind of a team of one based on my domain knowledge. And so me personally, it's interesting. I've had my ups and my downs. I'm sure just like everybody else has, and accepting the inevitable. The most productive weeks of my life, then eventually not the most productive weeks of oh my God, am I really just going from my bed to this over here to back and forth to then back to getting into a routine and listen, I think we all struggle with that as an engineer in the sense that, listen, I could work from home probably, I would say 2 to 3 times a week normally prior to COVID, right? And guess what? Those 2 days in the office though, right, really, really, really would make such a difference, at least for me, and how I would get myself involved in different pieces of it. And so, listen, in a lot of ways, our VOD content, as much as we are getting more premium content, right? And so we're recently launching Epics, and we're now going to be getting Epics 4K content, right? And so in a lot of ways, I very much, if my system's not broken, nobody really needs to go and find it, right? In some ways, and that's just how. Nothing to do with Fubo, nothing to do with that, just how the thing is set up and what it is. And so it's on me to be the person to really, and I very much would feed off the office, find things broken to go help people with, right? Things along those lines. I've also been doing some of the most productive work in my life of that. I wrote my own packager. I gotten to learn Kubernetes. I gotten to mess with things that are much more I would say R&D type of stuff that I really wouldn't have been able to do with all my quiet time, right? But for me, at least personally, there's less meetings on my calendar than there used to be. That being said, I've watched what's happened throughout the organization and the other communication points. Listen, we're used to augments. We're used to being able to give a task to somebody. It's on the project manager or the manager to do a good job of making sure that that process is put together. And so that, you know, in a lot of ways, there really is not much different there. I would say mentally, though, there's a bit of, as I said, ups and downs, right?
Do you find yourself more tied to Slack or less tied to Slack these days?
So my opinion is this, ready? People, you're going to see articles on Medium. We ditched Slack and went back to email because this, right? And so here's the thing. I'm going to make a joke about my CTO who is in his 50s. All right. Sorry, Gear, if you're ever going to see this one day of like this or that, but he's like, email me, Nick. Let's not use Slack. Email me this, right? Like before, you know, the world of COVID. Now, in the world of email, very much so, I feel like there's a given rule, right? You have 24 hours to say, hey, I can write back to you, or maybe really contextually understand what the person was trying to say, right? Or like I tend to somehow use my fingers so fast and type on my phone or whatever it is that to agree I could swarm you with messages if I really wanted to. The reality is that takes away from the value of the type of communication that you should be having. And also think about this way too. If you come from a traditional world, let's say you're not from tech, but you're now joining a tech organization and you now have this thing called Slack. It's on that organization to basically, I have no notifications from my Slack unless it's a direct message or it's an here. Like, you know, I've tamed my notifications and put effort into understanding what I want to be able to get disrupted by versus not, right? I think it needs to be on the organization to actually educate you how to do that, because guess what? You're going to feel this imperative need because somebody sent you a message on Slack that you need to answer right away. And honestly, that's like as if somebody's in the office standing right next to you being like, hey man, what's going on? What are you doing? What are you doing over there? Right? How's life? Like, and so Slack is a blessing and a curse in so many ways, but I really do think going back to email, and I personally have been like, all right, I'll write an email, check your email later, right? Like I stopped going on Slack for a lot of things, right?
I love email. Here. I love email.
Well,
sorry, dear, if you ever see this, you're not
50 era. And here's what's funny too.
Wait, hold on 1 second. Tanu, how do you feel about email?
I feel I'm being set up for that question after the ageist remark. But you know what? I don't like email. I don't like Slack, but it's an important means of communication. I really like face-to-face communication. I really like this energy of being able to meet people in the hallway and talking to people. I think there are a lot of synergies that come out of that, which Slack loses, email definitely loses. So really, there is no replacement for that hallway conversation or even this banter for that matter, right? And I think
miss this so much. I miss this. That's why I'm so happy to be here. Like, you have no idea. Like, this is the most important part for me. A lot of ways, like, that's what makes it be an engineer, right? You have opinions, you have shit, you want to do this. And so not having that, it sucks. It really does, right?
So Tanu, what about productivity for you? I mean, you talk about your sort of preferred form of communication.
Right.
What's the productivity side of it?
So, you know, I think we're blessed in the tech industry. When the pandemic hit all of us, we were the most well-equipped to seamlessly start working from home. Several of us were already doing that on, you know, some form or the other. And so really, we've been blessed. I think initially, I saw personally productivity go up for myself, for my teams, because, you know, we're all hunkered down. But it gets to you, right? Your normal life has stopped. You're not stepping out of the house. The blur between work life, home life has just, you know, it's just blurred. And I think there's a place and time for everything. So I'm going to say we're lucky our productivity hasn't gone down, but you know, raring to go back to the office when we're all ready to do that.
I made a note on productivity. How do you know it's not just the fact that people are scared and upset, like other things in the world too, right? And so it's really hard to judge the concept of productivity, at least based on this conversation I've had in the past of like, hey, listen, this is not what the world used to be. Maybe we're all getting to the point of realizing that it is now, right? This thing is just the world of COVID is what it is. But the reality is I don't have kids. I'm really lucky in that sense. I don't have all these other potential distractions that a lot of my coworkers potentially have, right? And so it's, yeah, there's so many other things that can go into to affect productivity just outside the fact of us communicating out beyond the home, right? I guess is the other part.
See, 25 years of working for myself from home, and what you need is a blind and the kids really well trained in the background. Oh, you can't see them because of the microphone. You see, look, there you go.
Well, and I'm gonna
That's how
I'm
to
gonna
manage.
date
That's how to
myself.
manage the home office. Give them headphones and an
I'm gonna
iPad.
date, and that's precisely, Tom, why I've moved this 3 different locations that I've lived. Especially getting married. This is the background. It doesn't matter what everything else looks like around it. Actually, Nick, I'm gonna date myself completely because I'm 50 and I love Slack. But when I started my first company 25
You
years
and
ago,
Gear should have a conversation. I'm really curious. By the way, he's always in good faith, and he's like, "Get off my lawn," right? Like that's always his response to me when I make a comment on him sitting next to me in the office. I miss that too, and so like things like that. Listen,
so 25 years ago, when I started my first company, I had to take solitaire off my machine after the first 2 weeks because otherwise I was going from my bedroom or kitchen to my office in the house and going, the phone's not ringing. I guess I'll play some solitaire. And
Now
realize
I
that
know why
life,
it takes so long for you to respond to my emails, Tim.
Exactly. I'm playing blackjack on my phones. Anyway, all right. So,
sorry, Tim, I want to add one more thing. When you were reminiscing there, I remember 25 years ago, I had a professor in Carnegie Mellon, God bless him now, he passed away. He made us turn off our email notifications because he thought that was a distraction at that time. I wonder what he'd say when he'd see Slack today.
So when I teach as an adjunct professor, I've asked students to turn their phones off, and you would think that I'm asking them to sever their arm, because for them, it's turning it to silent. That way it doesn't buzz, but they'll still flip it over and look at it. Yeah, different times, different eras. And Mark, I guess this is what you've got to look forward to with the kids.
I'm sure by the time they're of age, it will have come full circle, and we'll just be sending smoke signals and semaphore signal lamps,
listening to the Beatles on.
God forbid you'll actually be speaking to them. Just be careful. Don't do that.
Won't that be amazing? I mean, just to put a bow on this whole conversation, I feel like there's a time and a place for all of this. I'm a huge email fan because I like to track things. I like to, I like the paper trail. I like the accountability that comes with an email to next point. There's a time and a place for Slack. I mean, we all used to be on AIM or Yahoo Messenger or whatever the ICQ. Yeah, exactly. I still have a 6-digit ICQ ID, by the way. So early adopter, just saying. The time and a place for everything. We used to all have IM that got replaced by Skype at some point, or now Teams, and some people are in like Slack is huge, and that's kind of the instant thing. But for some reason, there was this huge push to replace email with Slack when Slack came out, and I think that's where it got ridiculous. Like Slack's not email. Slack doesn't have many of the components of email, and I think it's absurd for us to think that it would replace it. But anyway, neither here nor there.
But one of the things it does beautifully is threads, and email threading is actually made email easier to sort of.
There wasn't always threads in Slack.
That's true.
There wasn't always threads in Slack, and so honestly, that's been one of the nicer features and things. Like it's funny, I stopped purposely if I'm in like a public Slack, right, and I accidentally post in the channel but not in the thread because it causes like confusions or it basically will bury a message or things along these lines. But no, listen to it forces me personally to think before I speak. I tend to do that not so well, and I talk very quickly, and I do these things like that, right? And so sitting there and thinking, even a longer Slack message, right? It would be the same way of thinking about either or. It's just not instant communication is the way I would think about it, right?
All right, I'm going to take us in a different direction. AV1.
Let's talk about streaming, Tim.
Yeah, exactly. AV1, especially AV1 in Silicon. That's a topic that has continued to progress forward as we've been in this COVID era. I'm going to open that up to, I know, Nick, you do HEVC in production, and of course, Mark, you do a number of different things with different codecs, but AV1 as it stands right now, we seem to be progressing forward relatively decently. CMAF obviously is pressing forward. Low latency HLS is pressing forward. Where do we see ourselves by the end of the year with a couple of these topics?
So if I may start, I was just going to say, I think it's a perfect storm that's building up, taking us towards hopefully one codec, one container format, and content that can
apparently there's 5 now. There's like 5 new ones apparently, right? And so continue.
But hopefully, hopefully we've learned from our mistakes of the past 20 years and we're going to move forward towards embrace this. I think one of the challenges, of course, is the hardware support for AV1. But we're seeing that open up a little bit, and we're getting decode support now.
And I know
first smart TVs shipped with it, right? Yes. I think this year marked the first smart TVs in Roku. I believe Roku. I'm not 100%. Yeah. I could double check the docs, but that's a big thing. Roku leads the world, in my opinion, when it comes to hardware support as far as OTT is concerned. If Roku doesn't support it, it doesn't make sense for me to touch it. I'll tell you right that right now, at least from a perspective, right?
Yeah. I think that's a fair call as well. Actually, I think that's what got it on my map this month was Yahoo posting that AV1's starting to get decode at a silicon level. That's kind of interesting. From my side of the industry, I'm only really interested in it practically from an encode point of view, and that still seems a way off. And I'm also, I also think that the codec world is seeing, as I always harp on, I think the codec world is seeing diminishing returns. There seems to be an awful lot of re-engineering in order to bypass some patent laws, which then seem to change just as this stuff's coming to market anyway. And I'm not really sure who's paying the patent fees anyway, because MPEG-LA certainly don't seem to charge anything for anything.
So maybe you guys can clarify to me, the young guy in the room, right? As somebody who's joined the industry, right? I know there's this thing called AOM. I know there's this thing called MPEG. I know that there's these things that I read rants on LinkedIn from the old MPEG chairman. Then I read AOM, and then I read somebody saying, AV1, and then understanding it. What is different about AOM compared to MPEG, right? And I always hear Google is somehow involved in AOM, but then now apparently the chairman of MPEG is a Microsoft guy who also was a founding guy from AOM, right? An AV1 supporter. And so, comment.
So let me
great
step
question.
back.
That is a great question, actually. Yeah.
Let me give some context, Nick, because I think this is important. So let's go back to articles that I wrote and a couple other people wrote around licensing problems with H.264. I came out of video conferencing. We used H.264 a decade before it was used in streaming, and there was a gentleman at Microsoft. Williams is his last name, I'm blanking on his first name, who said, hey, the ITU, which is the teleconferencing world and the streaming world, have some similarities. Gary Williams was who it was, have some similarities. Let's bring this one codec together and let's use it both for low latency, which we were using it for video conferencing, and low latency in video conferencing is typically less than 100 milliseconds. So, we solved that years ago. And then let's also use it on the streaming side where we will delay it a bit so that we can get it out at scale. That was even prior to HLS and Dash. But when Dash was adopted in 2011, Apple was part of that entire conversation. Their engineers were part of designing Dash. As a result of that, MPEG-2 TS, the transport stream approach, was put into Dash, but Apple never used it. They stayed over on the other side doing, M2 TS for HLS with the H.264 codec using the MP4 container, which was based around QuickTime Movie. Okay, now
well done, Tim. Top 10 points.
So, but here's the interesting thing: we've had a single codec that could do low latency, a single codec that could scale, yet what we weren't delivering it the same way, and we weren't necessarily using the same container format short of MP4. Apple finally came around and started doing fragmented MP4, which meant they could do byte range addressing on an MP4 file. I wrote an article for Adobe and Microsoft that advocated for that, from an industry as a whole, and the traction picked up on that. As we went along, though, suddenly HEVC popped up, and then the debate became not what's the container format, it's what's the codec. Then the licensing issues, when you ask about MPEG was a standards committee. They didn't hold the patent pool of licenses, which is why we had an MPEG-LA and a couple other groups. AOM, the idea was essentially we won't ask for a patent. They based a part of that on another client of mine, which was On2, that had VP8, which became VP9, and of course is now a portion of AV1. And so ultimately what you have is you have the technology issue. Can we solve the technology issue? And you have the licensing issue. And I think this goes to Dom's point from early on in the conversation today, is a musician may solve the technical issue of jamming with a jazz band from multiple places in the world, but if he can't solve the licensing issue, or she can't solve the licensing issue, they can't make money. AOM, the idea was, let's not have a license per se, just like VP9 or VP8 under Google, but it also creates some other potential issues there.
That's my question. Is AAV1 truly a free entity, right? Or is it basically large organizations still controlling the flow of things, but doing what I believe also happens so well in the world, right? Just like think tanks exist, acting as if, right, they are giving the world this free codec and trying to get to a place of it. But the reality, there's still the politics behind this group that is always going to be around and basically control what devices get the hardware support, right? Decoding and things along those lines. And so are they silently being MPEG, right? Are you silently another MPEG is my question, right?
Fair point. And I think the politics are a different thing from the licensing itself. They have gone so far as to essentially indemnify anyone who uses the codec from potential patent lawsuits. So that's a very positive step in the right direction.
AV1 has, AOM has, correct.
Yeah, and it moves us much closer to the FOSS or open source model of the way that, you know, code is used. At the end of the day, from a politics standpoint, I think that's the question. And I certainly think there's a question of, is AV1 any better than HEVC? Because what ultimately happened with AVC or H.264 is they kicked the licensing issue down the road for 10 years and said, we'll pick it back up at HEVC. Then with HEVC coming out, they said, okay, now we're going to start charging licenses. In reality, what happened is AV1's come along and said, hey, we won't charge you a license. And that's forced the HEVC patent pool holders to kick the licensing issue down the road for another couple of years as well. Do I think we get to a point where we have completely royalty-free codecs across the board? Yeah, we've had those in OGG and Vorbis and some of the others. Will they be the standard across the world? Hasn't happened yet. Doesn't say that it can't.
It's interesting because MP3's fallen out of the patent pools now and is effectively, and H.264 is only a few years behind that, by my estimation.
Correct. Yeah.
And given that I still think, you know, in every context I ever speak to, and H.264 is still absolutely the lion's share of all video delivered because it's the lowest common denominator. I've got terrible eyes. I don't value 4K. HDR I get, but 4K is a complete waste of time, and I don't know why we keep chasing this higher end compression. It's a bit like 5G. We're sort of focused on the new without finishing the 4G rollouts and getting ubiquity everywhere. We haven't quite got all the ubiquity of H.264 out there, and we're still trying to fight around over something with bells and whistles that we can't hear or see.
So I made a joke. There needs to be a mafia, right? There needs to be a video mafia that's going to go around to all these organizations and be like, listen, buddy, you want to talk H.265 for low latency? How about let's get rid of H.264 first? I mean, like, let's not talk about low latency. Let's not talk about these things, right? Like, let's go ahead and get everybody in one place and basically be like, oh, those ad fills, the CDN's a large place. They can disappear, right? So you better do that first before, you go ahead and go around it, because listen, it's the hot new thing. It's the hot topic. It becomes an article for you guys to write about in a way, right? And so it's a buzzword, and they all turn into that, right?
Tanu, I'm going to
sorry, I was just going to say, Dom, you were saying, why AV1? The compression, I think that's the direction we want to go towards in the next, maybe not this year, next year, maybe a couple years down the road. We will need that level of compression to handle the video. I mean, I think already a large part of the internet is video right now. And then we are going forward to more 4K, 8K devices. AV1 would be the right step in that direction to be able to take all those bits and stream them across the internet.
I'll tell you what, it's HLS and Dash that have the issues, or at least maybe Tanu, you could comment in your guys' world in the Twitch world, but in the OTT space, any player playback issue is not the fact that they can't decode H.264 or H.265 or something wrong. Usually, listen, there's a couple that I've noticed over the years, right? Like B frames and Chromecast or something like that, right? But the reality is it's the interpretation of HLS dash and the application of DRM that basically becomes the larger big stream issues that I've spent lots and lots of time debugging. Now, my question to the group again, why do we have HLS and dash? Why do we need it? Why do we actually, like, no, seriously, why can't we build a codec that basically now with the players being like the way that they are, say, hey, all right, I only want 50% of the video. I'm going to go ahead and grab these couple chunks of this codec, right? Because I only want 50% of the original video right now, right? And so my question, I genuinely wanted to get involved with the MPEGs or et cetera, at least, you know, in a formal capacity, because here, guess what? The people who are dealing with it on a daily basis, like myself, it's not the codec that I have issues with. And also at the same time too, then I don't need to make 6 versions of the same file, right? Like, does anybody actually understand that that's really the bigger issue? Or is it a bunch of PhDs sitting in a room going, how do I have fun today? Right? Or what do I want to build today? Right? And listen, I'm being exaggerating in lots of ways, right? But the reality is on a day-to-day basis, it's this thing called HLS and dash and the concept of it that very much so, you know, matrices, math, and the stuff that I know about a video codec, because it is foreign to me completely, we should be able to say, hey, I have this file, I only want 50% of it at the time, and basically build some type of protocol that says, hey, these are the things that I should grab when I want 50%, right? And I could do this on the hardware. Now,
so Nick,
yeah.
Nick, we solved this in 1994 with MPEG-1. There was actually a company who did precisely what you're describing. They would take a 100% MPEG-1 file, they would strip it to 75%, 50%, 25%. Unfortunately, the patent holders wouldn't allow them to modify the
lawyers, man. They really just ruin everything, don't they? Right? Like, you know,
lawyers do
they make themselves relevant and on everything, right?
To be the theme. Tanu, you were going to say something.
Can I just put something to you, Tanu?
I was just smiling because you know what Nick is talking about. We'd really like a world like that. We are progressing there. I think it's just convoluted in the sense we need the whole ecosystem to move, right? It's a chicken and egg story. You need the mobile devices, you need the TVs out there, you need the hardware and software decoders. If we went with your approach, for example, Nick, you would have to replace the devices of the whole world. The problem is you're never able to
absolutely
ship, right? It's never.
And I'm not blaming anybody, right? By any means of like, that's why. Did we ever think we're gonna have 8 cores on this thing that I'm holding in my phone when that was designed when it was? No, right? And so like the reality is, you pay the respects backwards, but like we can't, you know, in a sense that.
Oh, absolutely.
To bring it to COVID, right? Science is very much so the quest to answer the unknown in a lot of ways, right? And so in my personal opinion, the thing of COVID might be this thing we've never seen in the world. Us in the developer world, it's an honor to have done something the wrong way and now do it differently, right? And so like the reality is, so, you know, we are used to saying, hey, we can now do this better. Let's do this again. Let's try this again. Let's try this again, right?
Let Tanu finish up, and then Dom, I think you have another topic you wanted to go to.
Oh, I was finished. Sorry, I was listening to Nick.
Actually, it was a segue actually out of what you guys were both saying, and I think it's something I want to put to Tanu because I know you've got some oversight of some fairly large infrastructure. But there is this, and Mark, well, Tim, Mark, and myself will remember that the original SM Advanced Forum was a list server, which was very much full of the sort of very early webcasters in sort of 99, 2000, that sort of era. And there was always this. There was always the codec wars. There was always will it be real? Will it be Windows Media? Will it be MP3? Will it be real audio? And so on. And there's and it's absolutely apparent to me that there'll never be a convergence. There will only ever be divergence of format. And actually, I think you touch on the very reason, Tanya, is because of legacy. You can't just turn off legacy, and then suddenly a bell and a whistle in legacy becomes useful again. And that's happening at the moment in my perspective. You know, we've been saying for a few years, ultra low latency, at 1 second, 2 seconds. It's got to be measured in tens, maybe hundreds of milliseconds. You need session-based streaming to do that. And session-based streaming is coming back because edge compute is creating a totally transformative environment within which you can run even a bespoke workflow per user. So you don't need that constant. You don't need that standardization.
Well, what's the cloud? It's just mainframes, right? From what I've been told, when people used to log into mainframes and Linux machines back when, right? Like, you know, the reality is the cloud is a bunch of computers sitting up there that I log into, or the containers that live around, right? And so a lot of ways, full circle.
So I guess in an infrastructure, Tanu, particularly in an infrastructure the size of yours, do you see benefit to convergence? Because at the end of the day, convergence might mean you're repeating a process like you might have done in an appliance, in the appliance generation of computing, but in a sort of more, as we spoke about at West last year, in a more microservices driven architecture. Okay, we've got a user that wants Dash combined with HEVC, bang. Oh, we've got a different user that wants H.264 on a transport stream or whatever it may be. That workflow ephemerally can get delivered just for those users and be destroyed on the fly afterwards. So is there any great dominant value for you guys converging on a particular set of technologies?
So that's actually a very good question, because you could turn it on your head and think about it in a different way. We do have all the software building blocks, right? As you said, we can build pieces together and have ephemeral workflows. That said, if you look at the way content is getting distributed today, and if you're trying to do it, at the scale that we do it at Twitch, or you have user-generated content that's going out within, less than 5 seconds, it's going from broadcaster to viewer. Having the same format would be beneficial for everybody in the ecosystem. Any streaming company out there, the CDN companies out there. At Twitch, we're lucky to own the pipeline, the video pipeline, end to end for ourselves. And now we offer it as the interactive video service and AWS service. So any other developer can use that ingest to delivery pipeline. But really, I think that when we are able to come, again, evolutionary into a single format, it benefits all of us. We wouldn't be replicating that on the edges. We wouldn't be generating that. We wouldn't be introducing delays on having multiple formats, and multiple containers and stuff.
And I hear what you're saying, Tanu, but I've interviewed Tarek a couple times over the last 2 years. And one of the conversations he and I had last year that I thought was really good was when I asked him about, the VP9 pipeline in the traditional H.264. He said, we didn't want to build it just to say we can do 2 codecs. We want to build it to say we can do N codecs. And so I guess to Dom's point, are there learnings that you get when you say, I'm going to live in a multi-codec world that you may lose if you go to a homogeneous world?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are trade-offs. And again, we can't predict the future. But personally, I think a homogeneous world leads you to a more innovation on top of what you have, when you can bring the whole ecosystem together. And that's my personal viewpoint. I understand.
Yeah, fair point.
Yeah,
and actually, if we look back at DVDs, say, for instance, with MPEG-2, you're right. When we got to that standard, the on-demand disc market grew dramatically because we weren't fighting a war between two different codecs.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's go back a little further than that in history and talk about interactive television and interactive video. And I know Lean Forward is something that's really fascinating to you. So why don't you sort of take us where you think interactive video is going, and what the potential opportunities might be.
So yes, I mean, I'm really excited about that. 4 years ago, I joined the streaming industry, and we were all talking about OTT and sending television, and that was the breakthrough moment that cable TV was having to compete with. I think there's a generational difference in how we're consuming entertainment today. It's not just about passively leaning back in your couch and watching TV, even if it's being streamed. It's about being able to interact with that experience and then have the feedback loop and then get that experience to change. Now, in our case, we have a chat over here with a few people, several hundreds, hopefully, watching us and asking questions. But really, can we, think about such an experience at a scale of hundreds of thousands of millions of viewers across the world? I mean, Twitch does that very effectively for the gaming community. COVID, in my opinion, pandemic has just fast forwarded that whole interactivity experience. What is it that you can do with low latency video that you can get from a broadcaster to a viewer in, say, less than 5 seconds to millions of people across the world? What can you do with that? I mean, I can see places of worship, houses of worship. I can see concerts. I can see, we already do esports, but, cheering on regular sports channels. The pandemic has caused us to be isolated. watch and consume our entertainment. I think generationally, I'm ready to make the shift. 2 years ago, if you asked me, do you watch Twitch? And I would I don't have time to watch, the community experience. But things have changed. The world has changed. We're stuck at home. I feel that that's fast forwarded the fact that we still want to be in a community as human beings. I think that's just an innate human feeling.
So a couple years ago, we had conversations around second screen, and second screen traditionally meant you watched football on television and you used a flash app on your phone or tablet to interact with or see parts of the game and like that. You're talking about integrating it all within the single stream player, right? As opposed to breaking it out to multiple devices.
Right. I mean, today when we have OTT, right, you can't tell if it's the cable or it's coming over the internet, but it is still a lean back experience. Lean forward would be if with your device you're able to communicate. I mean, like you mentioned, I think it was about 15 years ago, we had video conferencing at Cisco. I worked at Cisco at that time. We had video conferencing, and we had video conferencing within the television at home. That didn't take off because it was too early for its time. The bandwidth wasn't there. The codex wasn't there. I think the time is right now, as we are going into more of an open source world, into a world where we are more sharing with our software and our ideas and innovation and packaging stuff together so people can focus on what is it that they do, as opposed to, like, for example, taking the Twitch pipeline and offering it to developers and pay as you go. Now you have a whole video infrastructure at your disposal without having to create one. You get to think about the next innovation on top of it. I'm really excited about that, to see what kind of interactive experiences will come out of that.
Good. All right, and to go to our final wrap up, because we're about 3 minutes out, let's talk about, normally this time at the end of SMAF, we talk about what events we're all going to. Since we're all sitting at home and going to events, what are some interesting events that you all are seeing or paying attention to within the industry that you might be attending virtually over the next couple months?
Actually interested to hear what you've been to as well, because the last month was saturated with back-to-back IBC surrogates. I don't know if you guys managed to get to any of the millions of virtual IBC events, but they were good from my point of view. They were very repetitive after a while. It was like walking around an exhibition showroom floor where all the companies in one area are doing the same thing, and you're trying to sort of mentally separate speakers out. But it's been incredible how many webinars. I could sit and almost run a 24/7 TV station of webinars. Like
we just did 24 hours of video. I don't know if you guys saw what happened in the video dev world, right? We actually covered every city for the last 24 hours on Twitch, streaming on Twitch, right? I was speaking in Melbourne. I got up at 6 a.m. and spoke in the Melbourne conference, right? It's been awesome. Like, there's been some really positive things that come from COVID. I believe the 24 hours are still on Twitch. Personally, my first ever video one was Demux. I got to go in 2018 or 18, right? And so Demux is going virtual. I just looked it up. That's going to be October 27th. And so 2020.demux.com if anyone's interested, right? That was a lot of fun. That's really all I have on the line, unless anybody asks me to go talk again or ramble. That's usually pretty much it. But I really have been enjoying listening to people's conversations and these things like that in the background, right? While I work sometimes. And that's been something that's new to me. And so that's been fun.
I agree. I do. I put them on in the background and kind of lend an ear as I'm focusing on something else. It's kind of been my soundtrack.
This is NPR in the background on the radio.
Basically, yeah, but it all pertains to my industry, so it's it's been an interesting.
So it's a niche version of it that you might actually catch something and then stop and go listen to in more detail.
Exactly, and it's interesting, to Dom's point. Like, it's interesting that now there's so much of it that I can literally have it as a soundtrack. Like, just kind of a constant soundtrack. There's always some webinar or something that's going on that has something to do with my industry. But to your point, Dom, I feel like when you attend an actual in-person event, you have kind of this inbuilt filter where I've seen that, I'm really interested in this, I'm going to go focus on this. But when it's when you have access to literally every conversation that's going on, it becomes pretty rapidly apparent that there's only really 3 conversations going on. You know, like there's 3 hot topic issues for this season in our industry, and everyone's talking about those 3 things. And if you've been involved in one of those conversations, or maybe 2, you're done. I mean, there's not a whole lot more that you're going to get out of 8 more conversations.
There seems to be, I think there's still a habit with webinars and event promoters, they copy each other. So, so events are actually just tiny little incremental improvements on each other rather than having their own.
Is East or West,
niche.
Stream Media East, not just a copy of Stream Media West? Is that that difference there?
Yeah, it's certainly just the accents change, I think, but to me they all sound the same.
It was. I mean, I feel like there's enough to answer Nick's point. Like, I feel like there's enough content there to have 2 shows in a year. And it's just that one is on the East Coast to, fit a certain geographical area, and the other one's on the West Coast. But to your point, like, I feel like there's no reason to call them East and West this year necessarily. It's just,
as you're in sales. Listen, salespeople will die without these. I don't know how these salespeople have been surviving
and I want to
without these conferences.
So I want to give Tanu the last word on this, but I also want to point out that what we're seeing traditionally in the past for us is NAB has been in April, IBC has been in September. Next year, of course, assuming that schedules stay the same, NAB and IBC will actually be bumped up against each other on 2 different continents. And the question really will become, do you go to both of them? Or is there so little difference between them, unless you're doing heavy work in the Middle East and Europe versus just in the US, that you choose just to go to one or the other? Tanu, back to the point of what kind of events now, before we start looking at meet space events in 2021.
So I might be the odd one out in this crowd, but I don't do a lot of shows and events. I pick and choose some of them. I'm going to side with Mark. I liked going to the destination and figuring out what the hot topic in the industry was, as opposed to, it's running in the background, you're listening to it, and somehow you've tuned out. So being the ability to be able to be there in human, have some interactivity with people around, I think the networking piece was also really important from my perspective. And I miss that.
Hopefully we can have both one day. I think we can have both.
There we go.
We can have a world that exists with both, right?
Tim used the word last month on the show, and it's a word that's actually I've used many times this month. The thing that's missing is the serendipity, the randomness of the networking. That is the thing that is missing. That if somebody can crack how to deliver this, exactly, it's the drinking session, and that's what we've always tried to create with SMAF, is that informality, because it's this type of conversation that really brings out the interesting topics that, whereas if you sit there and just talk about, the finer details of high availability, high scale microservices, it gets a bit repetitive and boring after a while. And it's so much more interesting when you can let the conversation flow more broadly, which unfortunately brings us to 6:05. We have overrun, and I didn't even get a chance to plug the Content Delivery Summit, which I think is important.
Go ahead, since that's the next one coming up, just take 30
but isn't that just a copy of the last Content Delivery
Summit? It is,
Summit?
but we're not even though it's Content Delivery Summit West, we're not.
Sorry guys, I know you have to get paid somehow. I know you have bills to pay. I apologize here.
So we're calling it Content Delivery Summit Autumn, because it's autumn, and that is a differentiator. So we've got the Content Delivery Summit Autumn, or Content Delivery Summit West 2020 next Monday. It starts at 10 to 9 Pacific time, so good timing for Mark, very late in the evening for me. I'll be hosting it through the chairing and programming it through the 8 hours a day, and we're going to be repeating the same structure that I've now instilled forcefully onto the Content Delivery Summit going forward. We'll be working up the network stack from submarine and fiber, locating POPs, powering data centers, all the way through silicon up into the compute space, and that's just before lunch. After lunch, we'll have something of a more traditional Content Delivery Summit where we'll talk about video streaming, caching, QoS, and then we'll be looking at the future of the convergence of CDNs and edge compute environments. So join Tim, myself, and Mark, who is in the wings, I think, in the chat room today. A different Mark, we're going to have to get an M2 hat for the other Mark or something.
Mark squared.
But with that, it leaves me to say thank you to everyone. Now, what I'm going to try and do is get you each to say goodbye, and when the camera jumps to you, I'm going to try and drop your lower third in briefly, so we've got everything nicely titled. So, Tim, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dom. I appreciate the opportunity, as always, to learn more from our guests.
As always, it's been brilliant. Mark, are you out there?
I am. I am indeed. Thanks again, Dom. It's lovely to be able to participate this time, unlike the past couple. And I thought the conversation was quite lively.
It was very animated this week, and not least because of Nick. Nick, are you out there? Say thanks. You'll have to say
Thank you for
thanks.
having me ramble about video. I missed this. And so I appreciate the time for everyone to put together to do this. And so thank you.
We're all always here and online. And last but by no means least, Tanu, it's been a privilege to have you on the show. Thank you very much. Do say goodbye.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
We need to cut the camera to you, Tanu, before we cut away from here. So I can put that final. There we go. I did the final thing.
Thank you.
That's what we needed. Brilliant. Okay, it's been a great session. Thanks very much. It'll all be available online within minutes of the show finishing. The podcast's on the site, and if you're bored listening to webinars, we can listen to our robot reading the news to you for hours and hours. There's over 1,000 podcasts on there that have been digitally read. So do tune into that, and if not, we'll see you next month. Thanks again.